Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 7-Minute Workshop. If this is your first time, welcome. We started this series to pick the brains of experts about timely topics, complicated topics, ones that really affect your business. We want to provide you with some actionable takeaways that help you make sense of it all. Today, for cost 2021, we've set your budget, especially in a time when you might be managing a remote workforce. To do this, we're going to be joined by NetSuite's resident expert on the topic, Scott Beaver. And I want to remind everybody, if you have questions throughout the discussion, you can ask them in the comments and we'll get to them at the end of the conversation. Now I'd like to welcome Scott Beaver. Hey, Scott, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Nice to be seen. How you doing, Fritz?
I'm doing good. Okay, we're going to talk about cost controls today. Before we get started, when we say cost controls, what are we referencing and why are we talking about it now?
We're talking about the policies and the processes that companies put in place to control their spend. And for companies that are on, say, a calendar fiscal year, we're right in the middle of the first quarter. So the budgets they prepared last year are just beginning to be used. So they should be tracking by now spend against that budget. So the cost controls are how they manage all that.
Yeah, so you set a budget and they're done at the end of the last fiscal year. Maybe you spend 2-3 months working on them. And then I guess you kind of say, okay, we're done now, right? So why is it often difficult to stick to those budgets? What are some of the major reasons people struggle to manage that budget once you've set it in place?
Yeah, I think there are several reasons. One of them is we have to remember that a budget is based on some assumptions about revenue. And if our assumptions are off and revenue doesn't come in as we expect, then that's going to throw our budgets into disarray. So we always have to be mindful of that. But the other issue is lack of insight into what's actually being spent. Accounting does a great job with the tools they have of tracking every transaction. But if I'm a department manager, I may not get that information until the end of the month or after the books close. In theory, I should be tracking every expense in a spreadsheet or some other application, but it's not always possible. Again, I may not have access. I may not see every invoice. Some vendors may send it to accounting first. And so it's very difficult without that kind of insight to make decisions on how much I'm spending, whether now is the right timing for an investment, et cetera. And then the third part is, I plan ahead. If I'm a department manager, say I'm a head of marketing, I'm planning out 2-3 quarters in advance. And so I may be making commitments in the first quarter that are going to hit my spend in the third quarter. And if my budget changes, that's going to put a lot of pressure on me.
So it might not be that you're out of whack already in January or February. It's
hopefully
things
not.
You're doing now that you could, but you could foresee that things might, roll on down the months ahead. And
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Most everyone starts out in a good position, but every decision, everything that you're unable to track builds up, and you usually don't know until after the fact that you've gone over budget if you're not doing, a really effective job of tracking it. I will throw in one other issue is, it's difficult for most managers to have time to review every single purchase request or every single invoice that comes in, particularly if it's all paper-based. It's piling up on a desk, and they just don't have time to provide the thorough review that they'd like to. So those manual processes also play a big role in impacting the oversight of spend.
So what are some tips to address these challenges?
Well, the first thing that companies should do, it's sort of a leading practice, is have a very consistent authorization process. Have a hierarchy of who can approve what levels, and then to the extent possible, make those authorizations as automatic as possible. We have to stop relying on paper-based processes if at all possible. That's what allows us to stay on top of what we're spending and who's spending what, which is just as important. many times we go over budget just from lack of oversight, but it's, we also have the risk that a potentially bad actor, either someone internally or accidentally, because someone's committed some other form of fraud, is going to hit our budget. So we have to have those, as much as possible, automated review processes and effective real-time tracking of what we're spending.
I've heard of managers kind of holding back portions of their budget. And people might be tempted now to kind of start this year. Let's see where it's going. Why shouldn't they do that in this environment?
Yeah. So whenever you have sort of a challenging environment like an uncertainty, there's a tendency to be a little more conservative. What I would recommend, and again, another leading practice, is you shouldn't be budgeting for a single outcome. You should really be preparing multiple budgets, sort of what you expect, a best case scenario, and a worst case scenario, and manage on a month-to-month basis against where you're tracking against one of those three scenarios. And so you're not really holding back. It's, I'm getting real-time information and I'm seeing what I'm spending. I'm seeing where the revenue is coming in. And so it's not like I have to sandbag, if you will. Another thing that helps though is having that real-time analysis of, okay, this expense just hit. How does that compare to my budget? Oh, I've got another purchase request coming in. Is that going to, how is that going to affect my monthly budget? I guess I should throw that in. We think in terms of annual budgets, but it's really, you need to think down to the extent possible in terms of how am I spending monthly and when are expenses impacting my budget.
Sure. You mentioned approvals earlier. How should they be rethinking policies around expense approvals and maybe even tightening up workflows around approval processes?
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone wants to believe that their team has the best interests of the business at heart. And in most cases that's true, but everyone has different priorities as well. And no one, no matter who they are in the organization, ever thinks they have as much budget as they need. So yeah, you really need to have tight approval processes, but it's just as important, as I said, to automate that to the extent possible. Force managers to look at purchase requests and make it easy for them to do so. Force them to review invoices and make it easy to do so. To the extent you can even make that mobile, that process, accessible via their mobile devices, you should do that as well. But yeah, definitely, I think most organizations over the past year, because of the challenges that we've had, have done a good job at assessing the levels and the hierarchies and who can approve what. It's now just making that whole process easier so it flows consistently. It doesn't require as much thought.
Does that change with the remote workforce, or is like even more magnified the necessity of doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's more magnified. I think we've probably all seen the news reports of different things that certain employees have tried to expense: delivery fees for their lunch, health club memberships, that sort of thing, cable TV. So unfortunately,
did you look at my last expense report?
Yeah, I didn't, but I was trying to sneak that through myself. But when we're not there together in a normal community like we typically are, it's much easier to sort of be detached and try to sneak things through. Unfortunately, it's just a lazy tendency that we have. So I think it's even more critical as we shift to a remote workforce, not just because of the current pandemic, but also as a long-term trend. More people are going to be working from home or working remotely, not in an office environment. So having these controls in place and paying attention to them is absolutely critical.
Okay, we're going to open it up to some questions from the audience. For those tuning in, questions, keep commenting. We'll get to as many as we can. I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question. How can NetSuite help with all of this?
Well, funny you should ask. So NetSuite absolutely automates the process of authorizing purchase requests and invoices. So that's one thing that, it takes a lot of the burden off of accounting, for instance, at the end of the month to try to track down approvals so that they can issue payments. But it also forces management to thoroughly review and sign off on every expense. So that's one thing that makes it easy. And we even are offering now the ability to approve invoices via a mobile device. So streamlining the process, making it simple, and then automatically enforcing it is one of the key things. The other thing that's just important, though, is that real-time tracking and being able to compare what's happening right now against that budget. So what am I spending against the budget, and even getting an alert ahead of time to avoid going over budget. So I don't approve a purchase that would drive me over budget for whether I want to do it monthly, quarterly, or for the year. So those are some of the key things that we're doing to help companies control spend.
Okay, we'd love to do shout out. Hello from Juan Carlos in Chile. Hey, Juan. Okay, I already asked the question about the remote workforce. I'm going to jump to how can a CFO or finance leader mediate competing priorities in a way that everyone feels heard? Ooh, age-old question there.
Yeah, and that's one of the toughest challenges for a CFO. More and more, their role is becoming a sort of strategic, focused, long-term growth strategy, and it's one of the it's not just about finance. You're managing change and communication more and more across the organization. So the first thing to do is you've got to listen. When there is competition, you've got to listen and then effectively communicate back to everyone involved. Here's what we agree are the priorities for the business. You've said your budget request is going to contribute in this way. She said her budget request is going to contribute in that way. Given the competing priorities, this request has priority over that request. It's not easy. Someone is going to be frustrated. But if you can base it on logic and what the likely return on the investment is going to be, it's much easier conversation to have.
Scott, you've been involved in a lot of budgeting discussions and probably on all sorts of parts of managing a budget. Have we gotten better at creating and sticking to a budget?
The tools to do so have gotten better. Not everyone has gotten better. When one time I had $1 million budget that I had to keep track of, and I had to do everything in Excel. There was no program at a departmental level that allowed me to see what I was spending. And so at the end of every month, I had to sit down with accounting and we reconciled what they had versus what I had. And there were always changes that had to be made. Now with an application like NetSuite, I can see that in real time. I know what's hitting the books, when it's hit the books. And again, I'm seeing that budget versus actual, and I'm comparing that even to revenue. So I know I have some advanced notice that, hey, I may be asked to reduce spend at some point. So I think the tools are better, but we have to use those tools. If we don't, then the technology doesn't give us benefit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to name names, but our producer always asks for more money after the budgeting process. And, it's like an age-old problem.
Somebody once told me that. Go ahead.
No, please respond.
Say, someone once told me everybody thinks they can change the world if they had a few more people and a little more money.
Yeah, well, it's true. I say the same thing. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
And as always, a big thanks to all of you for tuning in. Good luck in sticking to your budgets. We'll be back next week to discuss accounting and compliance regulations with NetSuite expert Lisa Robinson. That's happening on Thursday, February 18th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. See you then.